He leaned down in the middle of a room full of powerful people and whispered, "Smile, take my hand, and pretend you're my wife." And somehow that single sentence would drag her into a world she had spent her entire life trying to avoid. The chandelier light above the ballroom shimmered against polished marble floors, reflecting off crystal glasses and designer jewelry. But none of it felt real to her as she sat alone at the far corner table, tucked just close enough to the kitchen doors that she could hear the staff arguing in hushed voices behind swinging panels. It was safer there, less visible. That had been the plan when she accepted the invitation. She almost declined 3 times. A charity dinner like this wasn't meant for people like her. Not for a 29-year-old single mother who spent her days juggling 2 jobs, who calculated grocery totals before stepping into checkout lines, who wore the same black dress she'd bought on clearance 3 years ago and prayed no one would recognize it. The room was filled with people who spoke casually about investments and vacation homes, people who laughed too easily and too loudly, their confidence as expensive as the suits they wore. She had no place among them, and she knew it. Still, she had come, because turning it down would have raised questions she didn't have the energy to answer. Because sometimes showing up, even when you didn't belong, was easier than explaining why you couldn't. Her fingers tightened around the stem of her water glass as she watched couples drift across the floor, laughter spilling between them like they had never known struggle, never known what it meant to stretch a paycheck or stay awake at night wondering how to make everything work. Her phone buzzed softly in her purse, and she didn't need to check to know it was the babysitter texting an update about her daughter. 5 years old, bright, curious, always asking questions she couldn't fully answer. Questions about why they didn't have the same things as other families. Questions about why her father wasn't around. Questions that lingered long after bedtime stories ended. She inhaled slowly, steadying herself, reminding herself she was here for a reason, even if that reason felt thinner with every passing minute. The murmurs in the room shifted suddenly, like a ripple moving through water, subtle at first, then undeniable. Conversations quieted. Heads turned. It wasn't loud or dramatic, but it was powerful enough to pull her attention without effort. Someone had arrived. She didn't look immediately. Instinct told her not to draw attention, but curiosity won after a few seconds too long. When she finally lifted her gaze, she saw him. He wasn't surrounded by a crowd, didn't make a show of his presence, and yet everything about him commanded the room. Tall, composed, dressed in a perfectly tailored dark suit that fit him like it had been made for no one else. He moved with the kind of quiet confidence that didn't need to announce itself. People noticed him anyway. They always would. But it wasn't just his presence that made her pulse shift. It was the fact that his eyes, sharp and focused, seemed to pause on her. Just for a moment. It was brief enough that she almost convinced herself she imagined it. Why would someone like him look twice at someone like her? She dropped her gaze quickly, heat rising to her cheeks, dismissing the thought as nothing more than nerves playing tricks on her mind. The night continued, speeches blending into applause, servers weaving between tables with practiced ease, but the sense of unease lingered beneath her skin. She checked the time again. Maybe she could leave early. No one would notice. No one would care. She was just reaching for her clutch when the chair across from her shifted slightly, the soft scrape against the floor pulling her attention back up. He was standing there. Up close, he was even more striking, not just because of how he looked, but because of the way he held himself, like he was completely in control of every moment around him. His gaze met hers directly, not dismissive, not curious, but deliberate. "You've been sitting alone all evening," he said, his voice low, smooth, carrying a weight that made her instinctively sit straighter. "That seems like a waste." Her first instinct was to deflect, to brush him off politely and retreat back into the safety of invisibility, but the words caught somewhere between her thoughts and her lips. "I'm fine," she managed, though it sounded less convincing out loud. He didn't move away. Instead, he studied her for a second longer, as if measuring something she couldn't see. "No," he said quietly, "you're not." The certainty in his tone unsettled her more than anything else. "You don't know anything about me," she replied, a hint of defensiveness slipping through despite her efforts. "I know enough," he said, pulling out the chair beside her and sitting without waiting for permission. The boldness of it should have irritated her. Instead, it left her momentarily speechless. "I know you don't belong here," he continued, not unkindly, just stating a fact she had already admitted to herself. And I know everyone in this room can see it. Her grip tightened around the edge of the table. Then why are you talking to me? She asked. His lips curved slightly, not quite a smile. Because I also know what it looks like when someone is underestimated. Before she could respond, the music shifted, a slower rhythm filling the room as couples began moving toward the dance floor. He stood and extended his hand toward her, the gesture confident, expectant. Stand up, he said. She stared at his hand, her mind racing through every reason to refuse. This was ridiculous. She didn't know him. She didn't belong in his world. This was exactly the kind of attention she had been trying to avoid all night. I don't dance, she said, shaking her head slightly. Tonight, you do, he replied, his tone leaving little room for argument. Then he leaned closer, just enough that his next words were meant for her alone. Smile, take my hand, and pretend you're my wife. The sentence hit her like a shock, her breath catching as confusion flooded her thoughts. What? She whispered. Just for tonight, he said calmly, as if what he was asking made perfect sense. It solves more problems than you realize. She glanced around the room, suddenly aware of eyes already drifting in their direction, curiosity building. This was a mistake. Every instinct told her to walk away, to leave before she became part of something she didn't understand. But something else, something quieter, deeper, held her in place. Maybe it was the way he looked at her, not with pity or judgment, but with a strange kind of certainty. Maybe it was the exhaustion of always feeling invisible. Or maybe it was the dangerous thrill of stepping into a moment that wasn't supposed to be hers. Slowly, almost against her own better judgment, she placed her hand in his. One dance, she said. His fingers closed around hers, firm but not overpowering, as he helped her to her feet. We'll see, he murmured. And just like that, as he led her toward the center of the room, every eye turned. Not because of who she was, but because of who she appeared to be standing beside. And for the first time that night, she wasn't invisible anymore. The moment his hand settled at the small of her back, everything shifted. It wasn't just the dance. It was the way the entire room seemed to adjust around them. Conversations quieting, eyes following their every step as if she had suddenly become someone worth noticing. Minutes ago, she had been invisible, tucked away at a forgotten table. Now, she was at the center of attention, moving in perfect rhythm with a man who carried himself like he owned every space he entered. Relax, he murmured when he felt her stiffness. You're trying too hard. Easy for him to say. He wasn't the one pretending. I don't even know your name, she whispered as he guided her through a slow turn. You don't need to, he replied smoothly. Not yet. That should have unsettled her more than it did. Instead, she found herself following his lead, step after step, letting the illusion wrap around them. People are staring, she said under her breath. That's the point, he answered. They needed a reason to see you differently. The words caught her off guard, landing somewhere deeper than she expected. No one had ever said something like that to her before. And what do you get out of this? She asked. His gaze flickered briefly across the room before returning to her. Peace, he said simply. She didn't understand, but she didn't push. The music carried them, the world narrowing to the warmth of his hand and the steady rhythm beneath their feet. For a moment, just a moment, she forgot everything else. When the song ended, the applause felt louder than before, heavier somehow, as if it meant something now. He didn't let go immediately. Smile, he said softly. We're not done yet. And they weren't. People approached almost instantly, curious, probing, suddenly interested in who she was and how she had gone unnoticed for so long. You didn't mention you were coming with someone, a woman said, her polite smile barely hiding her curiosity. She hesitated, unsure what to say, but he stepped in without missing a beat. We prefer to keep things private, he said, his arm resting lightly around her shoulders. It makes things more interesting. The shift was immediate. The same people who had overlooked her were now studying her with a completely different kind of attention. It wasn't pity anymore. It was something closer to respect. The night blurred after that. Conversations she barely followed, smiles she wasn't used to receiving, questions he answered for her before she had to think. He controlled everything effortlessly, like this kind of performance was second nature. You're enjoying this, she said quietly when they finally had a moment alone. And you're not enough, he replied, glancing at her. She shook her head. This isn't real. No, he agreed. But it's not meaningless either. Before she could respond, a voice cut through the moment. So this is where you disappeared to. Her stomach tightened instantly. She turned to see him. The man from her past. The one who knew exactly how to make her feel small without even trying. His eyes moved between her and the man beside her, something sharp settling behind them. Didn't expect to see you here, he added. She straightened instinctively, old habits rising, but before she could speak, the man beside her stepped slightly forward. And yet she is, he said calmly. The difference between them was immediate, undeniable. One carried memories she wanted to forget. The other stood like he wasn't threatened by anything at all. I was talking to her, the first man said, his tone tightening. You're done now, came the quiet reply. No raised voice. No aggression. Just certainty. A brief silence stretched between them before the tension broke. The man from her past exhaled sharply, shaking his head. Be careful, he muttered, before walking away. She watched him go, her heart still racing, then turned back. You didn't have to do that, she said. Yes, he replied simply. She studied him more closely now, something finally clicking into place. This wasn't just about a dance. This wasn't just about appearances. There was something bigger here, something she didn't fully understand yet. Who are you? She asked quietly. He held her gaze, unreadable. Someone you shouldn't trust, he said. Then, after a slight pause, his expression softened just enough to make her breath catch. But probably will anyway. And deep down, she already knew he was right. The illusion didn't shatter all at once. It cracked slowly, then all at once when it mattered most. By the end of the night, she had almost convinced herself it could stay simple. One dance, one lie, one evening where she got to feel like someone else. But life didn't work like that, and neither did men like him. It started outside, under the dim lights of the entrance as guests began to leave, laughter fading into the quiet hum of engines and distant traffic. She had stepped away for air, needing space to think, to breathe, to remember who she was before everything blurred together. That's when she noticed the shift. The way the driver straightened. The way two men nearby stopped pretending not to watch. And then him. Already there, already alert, his entire presence changing in an instant. Gone was the effortless charm, the calm confidence of the man who led her across the dance floor. In its place was something sharper, colder, dangerous. Stay close to me, he said quietly, his tone leaving no room for argument. Her pulse spiked. What's going on? She asked, her voice barely steady. His eyes scanned the area before settling on hers. The part of my world I didn't want you to see. That was the moment everything became real. Not the dance. Not the pretending. This. The tension in the air. The unspoken threat pressing in from all sides. She saw it now. The truth behind the rumors. Behind the way people had reacted to him. He wasn't just powerful. He was feared. A car door slammed somewhere too hard. One of the men moved slightly closer. Instinctively, his hand found hers again, firmer this time. Protective, not performative. You need to leave, he said. She shook her head before she even realized she was doing it. Not without understanding what I just walked into. For a second, something flickered in his expression. Frustration, maybe, or something closer to concern. You walked into me, he said. And that comes with consequences. The honesty in his voice hit harder than anything else that night. No lies. No charm. Just truth. She could walk away. She knew that. Go back to her life, to her quiet struggles, to being invisible again. Safe. Simple. Alone. But as she stood there, heart racing, she realized something had already changed. That door had already closed. Then don't push me away, she said softly. Not after pulling me into this. The words hung between them, heavier than they should have been. For the first time, he hesitated. Really hesitated. Then he stepped closer, his voice lower now, meant only for her. If you stay, he said, this doesn't go back to normal. There's no pretending anymore. She held his gaze, steady despite everything. Then maybe I don't want it to. Silence stretched for a moment, filled only by the distant sounds of the night. Then, slowly, something shifted in his expression, not the dangerous edge, but something beneath it. Something real. His hand tightened slightly around hers. Not to control, not to guide, just to hold. One dance, he said quietly, almost to himself. That's all it was supposed to be. She gave a small, breathless smile.